Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to another Flycast Partners webinar. My name is Rich Long, and I'll be your host, and thank you for joining us for another presentation on organizational change management. Our presenter will be Flycast Partners' very own Chuck Spencer, the ITIL guru himself. Chuck is our lead enterprise service management practitioner and has a very accomplished background that includes Lean Six Sigma Black Belt, an ITIL V3 expert with multiple certifications, including ISO 20000 Manager and Consultant, COBIT 5, PMP, Agile and Scrum, Master and Change Management Practitioner, and Chuck has over 25 years of experience in improving and implementing service management processes to drive quality, efficiency, and customer satisfaction. He's an innovative and results-oriented senior technology leader with progressive experience in all phases of service management, project and process management, enterprise technical support, organizational leadership, and strategic development. Before we get started today, Chuck, let me introduce our organization. Flycast Partners is here to deliver a seriously amazing IT experience. Founded and staffed by personnel that have many years of experience in IT space, we took the best ideas from these collective experiences and added the best components necessary to grow and become a leading value-added reseller in the North American IT market. We offer best-in-class implementation services and training in ITSM, ITAM, ITOM, enterprise service management, and workload automation spaces, all using ITIL best practices. Our professional services can easily scale up or down to meet the IT needs of any customer, regardless of size, complexity, or budgetary restrictions. We offer implementation services both on-site and remote, as well as training to help reinforce your company's long-term IT success. Our ongoing remote administration and support service offerings will enable your organization to focus on those normal day-to-day operations, saving you both precious time and money. Please feel free to reach out to us at 844-FLYCAST, that's 844-FLYCAST, 359-2278, or you can email us at info@flycastpartners.com, but even better yet, visit our website, flycastpartners.com, and check out some new webinars that are upcoming that you can share with your coworkers and invite them to. Check out new technologies that we've added to our portfolio and new services that may be available that may be of interest to you and your organization. So without further ado, actually, we're just going to go ahead and turn this over to Chuck. Now, Chuck, it's all yours, sir.
Well, most of us who have been in IT for a while and involved in ITEL and ITSM recognize change management as the process to transition services from design into operations or to make changes to those services. And it is something that many of us deal with on a regular basis, and we've really become comfortable with that term. But there is, of course, another organ of change management, and that would be organizational change management. And it has been confusing for a lot of people, so confusing, in fact, that in ITEL 4, I can share with you that a decision has been made to change management. Sounds redundant, doesn't it? But to change management to change control rather than call it change management. And another reason for that is in ITEL 4, they've recognized for the first time how important organizational change management really is, and they're going to provide some guidance on organizational change management as one of the practices that's within ITEL 4. And I think that's going to be very helpful. Before, we just kind of referred to the fact that it needed to be done, but there was no guidance within ITEL. And those of us who've been involved with helping people implement ITEL really realize that any time you're doing that, you really need to do organizational change management because you're changing the way people behave and their attitudes. Now, the name organizational change management itself is really a misnomer. You don't really change the organization. You help the people in the organization to change their behaviors and their work habits, which in turn moves the organization in the direction you need it to go. And you do that by helping them transition from a current state to the desired state that the organization needs them to be in order to be successful. And to accomplish this, there are some specific things that are required. First, of course, you need to have a vision that provides a clear and a simple picture of what the organization or the system or whatever it is you're changing is going to look like once the changes have been completed. The second is sponsorship, and we're going to talk a lot more about that in just a couple more slides. Along with sponsorship, comes the need for well-defined roles and responsibilities. Who does what, how, and when, not just as you're doing the change, but once the change is complete and it's now in your normal day-to-day activities. Then stakeholder management, which involves communication. Communication for organizational change management needs to be an effective combination of one-way and two-way communication, with the emphasis really on two-way. Now, I said earlier, you don't change an organization, you change the people within the organization, and you do that by enabling them to make the change. And that enablement comes through empowerment. Change occurs when people are well trained, they're highly motivated, and they have the freedom to try things out in a safe environment where success is celebrated, rewarded, and failure, while it's not desired, is accepted, as long as the knowledge that's gained can be applied to turn that failure into a success. Effective organizational change management also requires resistance management. Resistance is inevitable. You have to plan for it ahead of time and then effectively deal with it and remove it when it occurs. And finally, effective organizational change management requires continual positive reinforcement. People need to be nurtured along the way in the change process. You need to find and celebrate quick wins, help them get over obstacles, encourage them to move forward, the same as you might do a child when you're teaching them how to walk or how to ride a bike. Now, to accomplish all this, like I said, you have to have sponsorship, and sponsorship is a must for any organizational change effort. Transforming the way you do business today requires significant sponsorship from the top levels of the organization. And this means top-down commitment from some form of an organizational governing body, whether that be an executive board, a steering committee, or a small group of top-level leaders. The top-down commitment then needs to be exemplified by a visible and sustained commitment and involvement of those change sponsors throughout the initiative, including any learning events or significant stakeholders, any meetings, anything that really is going to occur. The sponsors need to select and support respected resources across the organization to act as change agents, and then ensure that those individuals have the appropriate skills and training in the facilitation of change and the time needed to act as change agents. Sponsorship means empowering individuals and groups to take on initiatives in line with the changes needed, and doing this by providing them a mix of responsibility and authority along with training and experience. Now, finally, sponsorship means providing continual, consistent, wide communication of the vision, the importance of reaching the vision, and the progress towards that vision. Now, Prasai, who's a recognized leader in organizational change management, did a study in 2012 with 650 participants in 62 countries and identified the greatest contributor to the overall success of change management as active and visible executive sponsorship. And the greatest obstacle, according to those same respondents, was ineffective management sponsorship from senior leadership. Now, once you have the sponsorship, the sponsor or the sponsors need to create a vision that outlines how the organization wants to be seen by the outside world. What picture do they want others to see when they look at the organization? Joseph Cotter, a well-known leader in the area of organizational change management, takes this a bit farther by saying it's not just a picture, but you have to also offer a reason why someone should strive to create that future. What is it about the vision that would attract someone to it or encourage them to achieve it? You know, whether you love or loathe Donald Trump, doesn't matter. His vision of make America great again is a perfect example of this. You know, anyone who says that has to believe in it, has to want to make it happen. It has to really mean something to them. Now, once you've established the vision, it's important to begin to create your strategy for organizational change management. How will you manage change within your organization? Do you have the resources and the capability to do this internally, or do you need to use a consulting or a third-party organization? You then develop some strategic objectives that allow you to identify a number of change initiatives that are part of your change portfolio with some specific expected outcomes and benefits from each one. And you want to do these as short, achievable time-frame projects to keep momentum going, and of course constantly check to ensure that the results you're getting is actually contributing to the vision that you have in place. There are some key roles and responsibilities in organizational change management that we need to talk about. These include the change sponsor, which we've been talking about, the change manager, the change agents, the line manager, and change targets. And now we already talked a lot about organizational sponsorship for the change and the critical need for this to be in place, but let's get a bit more specific about the role of that change sponsor. And I can sum this up in one word: leadership. And of course, leadership is made up of everything that you see here. The change sponsor is responsible for ensuring that the vision that is driving the change is constantly articulated, and there are consistent goals and objectives in place to achieve that vision. It needs to be clear to all the stakeholders where the organization is headed, how we're going to get there, and why it's important to achieve the changes needed to get to that vision. They need to act as champions for the change and create a sense of urgency on why it must be done, why it must be done now, and the speed with which it needs to be done. The sponsor needs to gain the commitment and the involvement of senior line management and others to ensure that they're informed and they're engaged and they provide the resources that are needed to actually get this change accomplished. Sponsors act as a role model and lead the way in establishing new norms. They need to be able to walk the talk, and they need to consistently communicate the change using a variety of media. Everybody doesn't receive information in quite the same way. Sponsors are often called upon to confront those who resist or block change and remove these obstacles to success. They need to be involved in training, mentoring, coaching, and they need to remain accessible to all of the change stakeholders. They need to ensure that the resources needed for change are available, and that often includes aligning infrastructure, environment, performance measurement, and reward systems to the change initiative. And they need to continually be ensuring alignment to the organization's strategic goals, that all of the change objectives and initiatives are contributing to the overall strategic goals of the company. And of course, they're not going to be able to do this by themselves. The day-to-day activity to manage the changes needed falls to the change manager, or in some cases, change managers. You may have more than one. Now, the terms change manager and project manager are not synonymous. There's a fundamental difference between change management and what a change manager does, and project management and what a project manager does. A project manager works to achieve project completion and manages events, budgets, timelines, all targeted at completing a specific objective, the focus being on completion. There's very little gray. It's all black and white. It's completed or it's not completed. A change manager, on the other hand, focuses on the implementation and on the transition of people from the current state to the desired state by managing their beliefs, their behaviors, communication, resistance, providing education and training for them. Nothing here is black and white. It's all gray. Now, a change manager is defined by his or her knowledge and competence in organizational change management, just as a good project manager is defined by his or her knowledge and competence in PMBOK or PRINCE or whatever methodology you're using for project management. Now, most organizations are willing to spend money on acquiring and training project managers, but unfortunately, that's often not the case for organizational change management. And instead, they rely on project managers to understand and deliver organizational change management, which often creates a conflict. Now, that's not to say that there's not an element of organizational change management in every project. There certainly is. Or that project managers have no understanding of organizational change management. It's just that they rarely have developed the softer skills and the knowledge required to do organizational change management. Now, just as a change manager and project managers are not synonymous, change managers and change agents are not the same either. Change agents, unlike change managers, have no formal line of authority to facilitate change in the organization. And they may be supervisors, line managers, senior managers, or sometimes even the change manager. But when they're in that role of change agent, they do so without a direct line of authority. Their role as a change agent is more of a coaching or a consulting role. And their responsibilities include networking to build strong change networks across the organization. In doing so, they're often connected to frontline staff and line managers involved in the change, or to their peers or others in similar positions. Their responsibilities also include ensuring effective communication occurs up and down the organizational hierarchy to ensure consistency and understanding of the message. They observe, they offer ideas, information, advice where it provides value, and they provide access to other knowledgeable resources when someone needs to know where to go for help. And finally, they help the sponsors, the line managers, and the targets be successful without themselves taking ownership of the tasks that need to be completed. Now, your local leaders and line managers, they play an important role in organizational change management as well, in that they're the ones responsible for creating and implementing the plans to actually meet the change strategy in a lot of cases. Now, when they're doing this, they need to budget and forecast for resources that might be needed, and they need to provide frontline leadership, sometimes even a little project management for for the changes that are being implemented. They act as a role model for their teams in the way that they accept and communicate the need for change and the alignment to the strategy. They're responsible for ensuring the communication is always bi-directional, and when there is resistance, managing that resistance by confronting it and removing it where possible, or if not, escalating it to the change manager or to the change sponsors. Now the targets, these are the poor folks that we're doing the change on in most cases, or they're implementing the change. And their responsibilities include listening to the information being provided to them, inquiring or challenging that information if it's not clear, to clarify any concerns they might have regarding the change. We want them to offer constructive criticism and ideas to further improve or speed the delivery of the change. And of course, they should always be providing feedback to the change manager and the change sponsors. Now, one of the first steps in organizational change management is to identify all of your stakeholders. Stakeholder mapping is a valuable tool in organizational change management, and it begins with identifying all of your stakeholders or stakeholder groups and then categorizing them by placing them on a grid or a map based on the level of power or influence they have on the change and the level of interest they have in the change or the impact the change will have on them. This allows you then to begin to understand how much focus, attention, and communication you need to do with these stakeholders. If a group or a person has a very low interest or the change is going to impact them very much and they really don't have much influence, it's really probably just a matter of keeping them informed about what's going on. Not a lot of time that you really need to spend with them. However, if they're on the other side of this where they're key players, you need to engage actively with them. They've got a real high interest in this change. It's really going to impact them. They've got a lot of influence on whether it's going to be successful or unsuccessful. So you want to spend the most time with these stakeholders. Someone who is an observer, you need to just keep them satisfied. They may have a lot of influence. They may hold the budgets and things like that. So you want to make sure they're satisfied, but probably don't need to keep them quite as involved as you do the engage or the key players. And then active players where they're really going to be impacted by the change. They maybe can't influence whether it's successful or not. You need to keep them informed to let them know what's going on. Again, a little less perhaps than you do the key players, but you still need to spend some time with them. Now, Patrick Mayfield, another leader in the area of organizational change management, and specifically in the area of stakeholder engagement, offers some really good advice on stakeholder engagement. First one is, you can forget about stakeholders, but they won't forget you. And that's going to be true long after you're gone if you forget one, which you don't want to do. You want to make sure you know all the stakeholders and you know how they fit into this. And then the identification that we talked about a few moments ago, putting them on a matrix, you need to think of that as a continuous practice. New stakeholders emerge during a change and old ones fade away. I would add that stakeholders themselves change over the course of time in their attitudes about the change, their alignment to the change, or their expected outcomes from the change. You want to prioritize and segment those stakeholders in a matter of time. And again, regularly, rinse and repeat, reprioritize. Again, I can't stress this enough. In addition to what I mentioned earlier, stakeholders change positions, they change interests, they change roles, all of which changes the way you communicate and deal with them. You do have to recognize that some stakeholders are best engaged by others. This is especially true if you're an outsider managing the change effort or acting as a change agent. Some people only respond to their peers or to respected leaders, and they'll actually disengage if they're approached by the wrong person or someone they do not respect and trust. When you're engaging with your stakeholders, you need to seek first to understand and then be understood. Listen to their needs, their concerns, and feed off of these versus telling them what they need to do to make the change. Emotion trumps reason. You can certainly see this in our political environment today in some of the changes taking place. You do not need to only recognize that emotion trumps reason, but often you can use it to your advantage and try and transition someone towards the desired state to get them motivated, to get them active. And then finally, demonstration trumps argument. Showing someone how the change will or will not affect them is often a better approach than arguing or telling them about it or why it will or why it won't do so. As much as possible, let stakeholders experience it, try it out, pilot it, the new application or the new process, whatever it is, in a safe environment. We often use simulations when we're trying to implement IT service management in an organization so that we can demonstrate the value they will receive from the change in an environment that takes them out of their normal activity and isn't threatening to them anymore. Now, as you're identifying your stakeholders and analyzing what it will take to get them transitioned to the newer desired state, you want to ensure that you're looking at the organization's capabilities and for change. And you do that by looking at 4 specific areas. First, what is the capability in the organization to both generate, provide, and absorb knowledge, education, and training? What resources do you have to do that? How successful have you been in the past? Look at all of those things. And then what is the organization's capability to actually handle change? How much is going on? What other changes are occurring? How often have they changed? How successful have been when things have been fast versus slow? Look at all those kinds of things. And then what is the process capability, and where do the processes have to change in order to support the new outcomes that you're trying to get in place with the change that you're making? And then finally, what is the capability of the environment to handle change? This looks at things like space, real estate, infrastructure. All of these have to be looked at from both the organizational as well as the stakeholder perspective. Now, managing stakeholders, as I said earlier, is about getting them to transition from the current state or situation they're in to a desired state, and then maintain that state until there's a need to implement further change. And to do this, you need to use a technique we call unfreeze and refreeze. It's sort of like the game my grandsons play called Frozen. This concept was first identified by Kurt Lewin, and he suggests that you do this by creating a competing and greater anxiety or survival anxiety. So to do this, you want to break down existing habits and mindsets, and there are key elements involved in doing this. First, clearly define the current situation that they're in and what is it about it that makes it comfortable to them. Involve the change targets in this discussion. The more people you get involved, the better definition of this you're going to get. Second, create a vision of the desired state. And here I would recommend using those who truly understand the organizational vision. Bring in your sponsors. Let them talk about why it's so important. And of course, here again, the more people involved, the better that definition is going to be. Third, you want to identify the forces that will both drive and resist the change, and then try to increase or leverage those driving forces while decreasing or removing the resisting forces once you've identified what those are. Now, once you've set the stage for change, it's time to actually start to take people through the change. And here you want to create a safe environment where they can learn and allow them to experience the change. And recognize that during this stage, there's going to be confusion when the change is first introduced. And stakeholders will often challenge the need for the change or look for some clarification. This is where you want to stay consistent in communicating the vision and the value of the desired state. The last part of this, or the last stage then, is to refreeze them. And this is where you want to make sure that the new work practices become the new work habits, and the new way of thinking is now the norm. As change managers and leaders, your job's not done yet, as you need to address any tendency that the change targets have to revert back or think back in the old ways again. Now, Shine built on this concept of unfreeze and refreeze in 1993 and had a slightly different view on motivated behavior, but yet it fits into this. And he really talks about doing this by creating what seem to be 3 conflicting activities. The first one is discomfiture, which is creating the disturbing belief that the current situation is just not sustainable. If we stay where we are, we're not going to survive. The second is to create a sense of guilt or anxiety so that people believe that they're responsible for that if they don't change, not only will the organization fail and not survive, but their goals aren't going to be achieved, or their personal or their career. And then you need to create a safe place for them to go to, the creation of physiological safety. And again, while this seems to conflict the first 2, it's really designed to prevent that survival anxiety that you're trying to create from becoming too great, by giving them a way out, a safe way to learn and move forward. Now, if any of you have not read Joseph Cotter's book, Our Iceberg is Melting, I highly recommend you do so. It's a short read, and it really speaks to this concept of making people uncomfortable, making them feel responsible for that discomfort, and then creating a safe place for them to go to. Now, let's talk about communication here. In parallel with developing your stakeholder management plan and managing your stakeholders, you need to begin your communication planning. It's important that this begins at the very start of your change, as communication needs to occur throughout the initiative. And it begins with developing a communication strategy that outlines the overall communication objectives for your change initiative. the key messages that need to be delivered, and the approaches that you're going to use. Then comes the development of the actual plan itself. How are you going to deliver that strategy in terms of who does what, when, and how, and to whom? And by the way, this is where another type of change management comes into play is this plan should be subject to change management process itself to ensure that any changes to the plan are analyzed for any risk they might present, they're approved or authorized, and then they're documented and recorded. Of course, then comes the actual carrying out the activities according to the schedule you developed in your plan. And throughout the change effort, you are measuring the effectiveness of the communication to ensure that the objectives outlined in the strategy are actually being achieved. Now, there is a difference between the communication strategy and the communication plan itself. Your communication strategy centers on, first, understanding the organizational context. Why are we doing it? Why are we changing it? What are the drivers? What is the nature of the change and the culture and environment in which the change is going to be taking place? Secondly, you want to analyze the stakeholders of the audience. Who are the people we'll be communicating with? And where are they in terms of your awareness of the change, the reasons for it, their attitude, and the likelihood and nature of any resistance? You need to set communication objectives. What do we want to happen for each stakeholder segment? What do we want them to know, to think, to feel, or do as a result of the communication we're giving them? Care needs to be taken that these objectives are measurable and you can link them back to the key milestones for the change initiative. Fourth, you want to select the communication approaches. How will you go about it? Major cultural shifts require a different approach than rolling out a new computer system or a tool upgrade due to the difference in the need to change behaviors and attitudes. Some changes are not planned from the beginning, but they really emerge as a result of other changes. In this case, how the change evolved might be needing or an understanding of that. Now, where changes are driven from the top, the approach is more on informing them and selling them on the change. A common mistake is to try and sell the change too early before people really recognize the need for change and are ready to accept that the changes need to occur and will occur. Fifth part of your strategy is to develop the key messages and themes. What exactly is it that we're going to say? These messages need to be consistent, whether they're coming from the managers or senior managers or the change sponsor or the change agent. It helps to overcome resistance when the change targets are always getting the same message across the board. So document your key messages early and ensure that managers, leaders, sponsors, change agents, and managers are all aware of and using these consistently. As part of this strategy, identify different types of communications that are going to be used. Short elevator speeches, communication packs with slide presentations, frequently asked questions. All of these are good things to use, but don't make them just about facts. Tell stories, use graphics, make them interesting. Make sure that people want to look for them and read them. And then identify who's going to deliver the key messages. Who are the key influencers with the specific groups? Who are the right champions? Who are the people they'll listen to that have the influence and the credibility to deliver those key messages at the right stage? And then finally, as part of your strategy, you select your communication channels. How will the messages get there? And it's important that these channels are used consistently to avoid confusion and encourage feedback. You know, newsletters and emails are good for raising awareness or bulletin style updates, but where fuller participation and feedback is needed, face-to-face events like workshops, town halls, roundtables, or focus groups really should be used. Once you've developed your communication strategy, that then feeds your plan. And the plan details out the specifics for each communication, the specific target audience, the specific objective of this communication, the key message that's being supported, the type of activity or event, or the owner who will deliver the message, and specifically how you're going to measure the success of that activity. And from this, communication schedule can be created so that you can track the target date for and the completion of each one of these activities. Now, we've talked about communication being both one-way and two-way, and both are needed in organizational change management. One-way communication should be used when there is a need to get information to a large number of people at the same time, or where there's urgent information that needs to be communicated in a critical time frame. It works well for that purpose when it's only to inform and share information. But two-way communication, on the other hand, invites that flow of information that you really need between the sender and the receiver, and it provides a dialogue to gain feedback. This type of communication allows more than just checking to see that the message was received, but encourages people to participate more in decision making and engage in the shaping of the change. This kind of communication is fundamental for ensuring that your changes will be successful and then that they can be sustained. So before deciding which to use, consider what you're trying to achieve with the communication and the level of interaction that's required to do that. Now, we talked about empowerment early on and how important that was. You have to empower the team and then stand back. To see the change, organizations and leadership need to empower their people to change. And that often means giving up some level of what's valuable to most leaders, and that's control. But empowerment means more than just that. Empowerment's based on the idea of giving employees the skills, the education, the resources, and the training that they need to support and implement the change. It means providing the opportunity and granting the authority to make decisions. It means motivating them to learn, to experiment, to challenge, and to succeed. It means providing them with a safe environment where they can experience and experiment with the change. And then it means holding them accountable and responsible for their actions of what they've done as they were empowered and getting those things done. Now, as I said before, resistance is inevitable. It's going to happen. You know, the saying resistance is futile, it doesn't work here. People resist change, or Peter Singh said, people don't resist change, they resist being changed. And that's absolutely the truth. Now, in 2012, Joseph Cantor identified 10 common causes for resistance, and he gave us some really good tips on how to deal with them. First off is the loss of control over territory. People have, this is mine, I built it, I own it, I'm the one who created it. You know, you need to leave room for those people affected by that to make choices, to get involved with the planning of the new change and take some ownership of it. Excessive uncertainty during the change. People are going to have some uncertainty. You want to create a sense of safety for them, that you do have an established process, you do know what it is. There are some clear, simple steps, and there are some timetables that we're marching to here. You don't want to spring change on people as a surprise. Don't plan in secret. Keep people informed of what's happening. Be very transparent about the changes you're making. And then don't change too many things at one time. That's a reason why people resist. You want to minimize the number of unrelated differences or changes. And where possible, keep things familiar. Don't change something just for the sake of change. You are going to, from some people, they're going to resist because there's a loss of face from associated with the current state. That, you know, again, they're the ones that created it, they built it, they spent maybe half their life doing it, and now you're saying it's no good anymore. Well, you don't want to say it's no good anymore. You want to celebrate what was really good about that in the past and why it worked well and honor that. But then talk about why we now need to make a change. What's different that's causing us to do something that wasn't there when they created this really good thing that they created 5 years ago. People also resist because they feel like they're not going to be competent in what you're trying to do. So you want to make sure that you're providing a lot of information, education, that you got mentors out there, that you got support systems, and then run those systems in parallel during transition if you need to, or on into transition, and even after the change. A lot of people resist because change is just work. You know, you need to allow some people to focus exclusively on the change and then reward and recognize those participants. But don't also forget to reward and recognize those people who are left back doing the work that these other people are not focusing on now because they're focusing on the change. They need to be rewarded as well. Then, of course, you always have a ripple effect that the change is going to interfere with other activities that are going on in other areas. Well, the best way to deal with this is to make sure you've got a large circle of stakeholders that, again, going back to identify them, you've identified all of the affected parties and then work with them to minimize the disruption that might be occurring against what's going on in their particular area. You're going to see past resentment surface due to the interruption of a steady state. I mean, it's working good now. Why have we got to change? Well, again, consider gestures to heal the past before focusing on the future, and, you know, talk again about, you know, why what's there was good, but it's not going to get us farther. So we need to look at that. And then sometimes the threat's just painful. It's resisted because it's going to hurt. This happens a lot when you got things that are going to cause layoffs, that sort of thing. The best thing to do here is just be honest, be transparent, and then be fast and fair. For example, if you've got a big layoff that's coming, don't do it in a bunch of small cuts where every day people's wondered about who's going to be next. Do it in one big action where there's lots of support. That's definitely better than a lot of small cuts, again, where people are just always wondering what the next shoe to fall is going to be. Now, to understand resistance, It's useful to understand the human response to change, and this is something we call the change curve. And it evolved from the work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who observed people in the process of coping with death and bereavement. That's a pretty significant change event when you think about it. So it begins with the shock of being confronted with a change, followed quickly by denial, which is often accompanied by a burst of defensive energy that the change is unreal or it's unnecessary. And this tends, ironically, to often increase performance and mood. You can eliminate that by effectively and early communication about the change and why it's needed, why we have to do this, and why they need to get on board with it. And once they've accepted that it's real, then they're going to look for who to blame. They're going to get angry. It was those damn consultants. It was the investors. It was the competitors. The best approach for this is to empathize with them. Help them consider realistically how the change is going to impact them. Don't minimize the risk or loss they're going to experience. They need to know what the loss to them personally has, that loss to them personally has been considered. It is understood, but we still have to do it. Now, as their mood declines further, they might start to blame themselves and begin to bargain to change in some other ways to avoid the plan change. If faced with redundancy or the loss of their job function, they may offer to work harder or take on more work. Here again, support them, empathize with them, create some peer groups and opportunities to participate in planning to change themselves so that they, again, feel like they're a little bit more in control of this. At the bottom of this, of course, is depression and confusion. Up until now, they've been trying to hold on. Now they've given up. Performance and morale is going to be at its lowest at this point. After all, why bother? This is going to happen whether I want it to or not. Here again, empathy, active listening, and good support structures are key to getting them through this stage. Now, at some point, the individual is going to begin to accept, at a deep level at least, that the change is inevitable and begin to look towards the future. Now, for some, this will happen quickly. For others, perhaps not at all, but it must happen before inner future-oriented behavior can really begin. Now, some may reach a certain point and then move backwards, but once they reach the point of acceptance, the individual will start to embrace the change and engage in problem-solving behavior. How can I train for my new role in the organization? How can I learn the skills? They're going to now start to really get engaged. I need to use this system. Your role as a leader, as a change manager, as a change agent, is to encourage them, empathize with them, support them, provide clear and consistent communication, and above all, be transparent and help them move through this curve. Now, I want to leave you with Kotter's 8-step approach. As I mentioned earlier, Kotter is a well-known author of a number of books on change management. Probably the best one is this 8-step approach to organizational change management. And this really kind of summarizes everything that we've talked about here in the presentation today. His first step, creating a sense of urgency, speak to much of what we talked about earlier. Kotter believes that it's essential that a majority of an organization's employees, 75% of its managers, and virtually all the top executives believe that there's an organizational urgency to change. Second, he recommends the creation of a guiding coalition sponsorship that contains people with strong positional power, varied expertise, and celebrity or credibility, maybe even celebrity, but mostly credibility across the organization to guide and direct that change effort. Third, he talks about developing a vision that, as I quoted earlier, provides a picture of some explicit or implicit commentary on why people should strive to achieve that vision. And then fourth, it's all about communicating that vision in clear, direct language using verbal images, analogies, cartoons, anything you can do to really get that vision across. Not only communicating, but including opportunities for discussion and feedback with the sponsors and leaders who walk the talk again. And then fifth, empowering the employees by ensuring that the organization's systems and structures really support employee action, provide training, reward contribution, and remove or sideline managers or others who really get in the way. Sixth is to generate and celebrate short-term wins. That really helps you boost morale, minimize negativity, keep everything going, keep the momentum moving forward. Seventh, Kotter says there's always going to be pressure to revert to old, known ways of doing business. And Kotter recommends encouraging the guiding coalition to press on, to deliver even more change with clear leadership and direction from the top. If you're giving them new changes to take on, they pretty soon start to forget about the changes that, the resistance to the change they had that they just got through. They're now focusing on something new. Now, eighth, Someone said culture eats strategy for breakfast, and it sometimes eats change as a second course. You have to continually identify aspects of the old culture that threaten the change that you're trying to put in place and address them by, again, recognizing the value they provided for their time and place, and then highlighting the benefits and the value of the changed way of doing business and how it's going to strengthen the new culture. Now, this may mean making some tough decisions and replacing people who are too stuck in the old culture by promoting those who embraced and led the transition to the new way of doing business. So that pretty much wraps up our conversation on organizational change management. I think if you take some of this to heart, you're going to be successful in what you need to do in the area of organizational change management.
Thank you very much, Chuck. I really appreciate it. It's a great presentation. And folks, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to us directly at 844-FLYCAST. That's 844-359-2278. Chat with our experts online Monday through Friday during normal business hours. We'd be happy to take your questions. Or you can email us at info@flycastpartners.com. I look forward to seeing all of you on our next presentation next week, and enjoy your weekend.